first time I finished What Remains of Edith Finch, I let out a sigh of beauty, an exhalation that acted as an homage to this moving experience, one that could only have been a video game. It was like Giant Sparrow had broken the code on how to make you play a poem, make you live a metaphor. This game is akin to an art installation, easing you into tragic tales without the violence of a non-filtered experience. Edith Finch touches subjects that are usually relegated to the darkest titles of our medium, but through the use of metaphors and allegories, the developers managed to make it bearable. After all, the story is mostly about tracing your biological tree without the respite of a lonely date of birth. In this game, years sadly always come in pairs. Because it is a story about grief, but more specifically about the way coping mechanisms are passed down families, just like genes are. The game cycles through the real and the metaphorical to let us step into a tale of a generational trauma, to explore how the lens through which we choose to look at our lives can become the burden of our children, or in this case, their coffin. So let's go through this story together, unpack the meaning of these fables and understand what it says about families and their traumas through the poetic language of video games. Hope you enjoy. What Remains of Edith Finch sets at the very beginning of the game its theme, the power of storytelling. Technically, your playthrough will be inside a story the eponymous character is telling, one she wrote down for someone we don't know yet, even though we can easily deduce. You go along the story as Edith narrates it, or to be more precise, reads it from her notebook.
No one had driven this way in a long time, but I saw a few hoof prints.
This also sets up one of the most interesting aesthetic choice of the game, having subtitles be embedded in the world. The words float, disperse, squeeze into space as if they were as real as the trees growing along the road. The subtitles are expressive and they are part of the artistic proposition. They hold meaning not only in their content but also in their form. They are part of the poetic language of the game. But what are we narrating? What is the story? What Remains of Edith Finch is the story of the titular character going back to her childhood house to retrace the lives of her family. It is a journey of self-discovery through the exploration of her roots. And the house they used to live in acts as an almost mythical place, its architecture bending the laws of physics without completely defying them, really encompassing this feeling of navigating between reality and fiction. If you ever wanted a masterclass in art direction, well, let's just say that few games captured their own essence in such a powerful image. Upon entering the house, the decor keeps its mysticism. Books, portraits, and plates are towering over emptiness like ruins of an empire long gone. It's also where we are introduced to the core mystery of the game, the tragic fate of the Finch family. Every bedroom is a shrine to its late occupant, every door sealed to preserve their story as if they were kept in a vacuum shielding them from the toll of time, or from prying eyes. And so we have our premise, a family decimated by a mysterious fate in a house where the door's peeping toms act like museum glass. And so the only way in, the only way to understand everything, is to step behind the curtain. The first room you explore is Molly's. She died in 1947 and was the first child of Edie, Edith's grandmother, who is probably the most important character in this story. The atmosphere of her bedroom evokes a castle, presenting her as her mother's princess, a classic role from a more traditional time, fitting of a firstborn. Gazing around the detailed decor, you open her journal. Molly's voice takes over as she narrates the entry.
December 13th, 1947. Dear Diary, I'll be gone soon, but I wanted to tell somebody about what's gonna happen.
We then step into the story, which is the recurrent way the game slides into its more poetic aspect. Every death has its story, every one of them anchored in a different presentation, a different gameplay. Interactivity and gamification act as this new layer of language, just another way the game's writers could infuse their creativity to elevate it with poetry. In this case, you now control Molly, who wakes up hungry after being sent to bed without dinner. You eat everything you put your hands on. Hearing a bird outside, you open the window. A neat trick that makes us believe she will jump and fall trying to catch the bird. And then poetry happens. She turns into a cat chasing the bird, and you are now gracefully leaping from branch to branch. And then you jump out of the tree to catch the bird, and just turn into an owl prowling over a rabbit fleeing in a snowy field. You catch and eat it. It's visceral. There's something gore about it. You then turn into a shark, falling off a cliff, trying to reach water to eat a seal this time. The hunger gets intense to the point of being unsettling. You feel its insatiable aspect because every absurd transformation doesn't even feel funny, even though it should. The shark segment particularly could be part of a comedy game, and yet with the music, the narration, you feel the kid's distress. You finally transform into a monster, and in a scene that could be taken out directly from a horror movie, you gobble one by one all the sailors of a boat. And in the last twist, your tentacle climbs up the pipes from a sewer, and you enter Molly's room. You are the monster under the bed, lurking as Molly is writing her final words. And then it ends.
I will be delicious.
We come back to the room, to Edith. What a ride. There's a lot to unpack here. First, what a wonderful introduction to the metaphorical aspect of the game. Starting in a grounded event that transforms into a surreal tale really eases us into what will be the hallmark of some of these set pieces. It does not act as a gameplay tutorial, but maybe more like a narrative tutorial. Because it's also where you understand that this is about the death of children. This is as dark as it gets, but there's a filter. It's not a brutally honest representation of the event. It's a very subjective depiction. In this case, we can understand that Molly poisoned herself with what she ate, and feeling unwell, she probably entered a feverish state that led her to experience this hunger dream that she wrote down. We don't see her die, we witness her walking towards death. We skip the gruesome part, and it is left to our imagination and our empathy to feel what it's like to find your daughter dead in her bed, killed by food poisoning right after you sent her to bed without dinner. Remember that, because to me this is the origin story of Edie Finch, Edith's great-grandmother. It's not a coincidence that just after we go through Molly's segment, Edith says this.
I'm not sure if I believed all of that, but I'm sure Edie would have.
Do you know how broken you need to be as an adult, so that when your child says there's a monster under the bed, you believe her? But it's a more bearable story than being yourself the cause of her death. Otherwise, it would mean that you are the monster. And see what I meant when I said that there's a lot to unpack? Every word told invites to understand 1,000 unwritten ones. It's indirect exposition. You can infer who the characters are by their action. And what a wonderful way to write. The people at Giant Sparrow not only know how to evoke feelings through all the languages available in video games, they also know how to write a compelling story. Molly's death is the first branch, the introduction to the succession of deaths that would come to define the family, at least for the family that lived here. The second room we encounter is Edie's, and it is where we find the larger origin story of the Finch. Originally from Norway, they sailed across the sea in 1937 to flee the curse, even transporting with them their own house, which ended up at the bottom of the coast of Washington, killing Odin in the process, the family's patriarch. And this is how Edie arrived in the US with her husband Sven. It already has this mythological quality, something bigger than life. And Edie bought into it like it was a Steam game on sale. She bought into the curse, the myth of it all. Her room is a shrine to that story. You can find interviews she granted, multiple copies of a book about the family's deaths written by her father, articles about the exaggerated tale of her husband's passing. Exaggerated tales she told. She revels in it, it makes her feel special. And what a perverse way to deal with the undoing of your family. This room shows how she transformed tragedy into attention. At its core, it reminds me of the way we monetize voyeurism through social media. If Edie was of my generation, this room would be filled with selfies at funerals. Having it be the second one we enter really makes for a 1-2 punch situation. Giant Sparrow introduces us to a tragedy, and then to the person who, in the weirdest sense of the term, profits from it. This way, 25 minutes into the game, you have the fundamental dynamic of the story laid out. Edie is the curse, and every story told will point in that direction. She lived with the legacy of death from her father, and she internalized that trauma and turned it into a self-fulfilling prophecy. Leaving Edie's room, we go through a secret passage behind the walls of the house to get to the room of the twins, Calvin and Sam, both children of Edie. Calvin died in 1961 at the age of 11, and Edith finds a letter left by his brother retelling his passing. There's a great level of awareness from Sam. The letter is titled, "How I Want to Remember My Brother." This is a very conscious way to grieve, impressive for someone this young. He remembers who Calvin was even more than what he did. Sam died trying to go around a branch on a swing. The swing was placed right in front of a cliff, and so he fell off into the ocean. Let me repeat that. The swing was hanging on a branch in front of a cliff. This can't be a mistake. This is inviting an accident. And this happens after Edie and Sven already lost 2 children, Molly and Barbara, who we'll meet later. For most people, after you lose 1 child, for the rest of your life you will probably become the most overly cautious parent on the planet. And yet this happens. It's almost like this carelessness is a way to make it happen. Because if it's more than 1 child, it wouldn't be your fault. It's the curse you didn't lose a child. It was taken away from you by something bigger. The more children you lose, the less it is your fault. To me, it's the only explanation. That this curse story born of the traumatic losses of Odin and passed down to Edie is a coping mechanism that endangers the kids. Edie is not building a safe environment for them. And they've grown so accustomed to death that you have Sam writing a profoundly mature letter about his twins passing. Probably more mature than his own parents since he thinks he is responsible. He also mentions that Calvin acts this way because he didn't want to let fear guide him after Barbara's funeral. This is a usual response to generational trauma. Either you internalize the exact same broken principles your parents hold, or you define yourself by opposition to them. Edie and Sven embraced the idea of a curse, and Calvin died trying to oppose it. And it's the tragedy of passed down traumas. You're bound to them either way. By opposing them, you still give them power over you. And because of that, Calvin died joining the wind. The next room is a weird one. Barbara was a child actress whose fame came to pass as she grew up. What's special about this scene is that, unlike the others, we don't learn about it through a family member's point of view. We do by reading a pretty dark comic recounting the event of her death in the style of a horror movie. What is true and isn't is really hard to discern, even though there are elements that could only be known by certain family members, like the location of the hidden key to the basement that you eventually use to progress. So even though it comes from an external source, there was input from the family, and with what we saw earlier and the fact that a copy has been placed in her room, it is more than possible that Edie was the one who sat down with the comics writer to give her take on the story, again turning the death of one of her child into an opportunity for attention. This time the filter is less poetic and more voyeuristic. It's looking at someone's death as content. The added fiction withdraws us from Barbara's life, probably in the same way fame did, and confines us in an unemotional point of view. In a way, Barbara's death is the saddest of all, not in the way she passed, but in the way she was remembered. Not with her own words or the ones of those she loved, but by a 10-cent comic wishing to capitalize on her murder. She died at 16, and it's hard to say how many of those years were dedicated to making Edie feel special through her fame. And in the end, she integrated so deeply that feeling that, in Edie's words,
Edie told me all Barbara wanted was to be remembered, as absurd as that comic was. Maybe what Edie saw was a happy ending.
All she wanted was to be remembered. How weird is it for a child to live its life about what will come after? And it's even more telling that we don't know how she wanted to be remembered. Walter's death is the one that is the most bound to the impossible architecture of the house. After Barbara's passing his sister, it seems that Walter became terrified, probably something in the range of PTSD or OCD. After a couple of years, his life was ruled by fear to the extent where Edie's solution was to hide him underground in something akin to a bunker. At that point, he was 16, the same age Barbara had when she died. In a letter he left behind, he recalls his almost 30 years of loneliness, from 1968 to 2005. How he thought the rumbling resonating through his room would make him insane, and how the unchanging routine kept it from happening. Every day he would open a new can of peaches to the sound of a passing train. The routine saved him, or as he would tell it,
even a monster on the other side of the door starts to feel normal.
In fact, he grew so accustomed to it that the day the shaking stopped, it shocked him to the point where he started to want something more. He went even farther below and started to plow through the wall, showing us again how intense Edie's grip was for him to literally tear a wall down, instead of asking his mom to go back to her normal life. You destroy the wall, the subtitles moving to the rhythm of the pickaxe. Finally, Walter is free, seeing the literal light at the end of the tunnel. A train runs over him. The very same train that shook his room for 30 years ended up punishing him for the audacity of wanting something more. And 30 years is a long time, long enough for Walter to have lived in the house at the same time as Edith. Her generation was not aware of his presence, even though Edie, in her quest for attention, gave an interview about a mole man living beneath the house, hiding it for those who could see behind the myth, presenting it to others who could publicize it. Edith says, "I'm sure my mom was trying to protect me, and yet it's hard for me to accept this angle." Well, maybe that's what she wanted, but in the end, protecting her from what? For me, it seems more likely that Edith's mom is protecting herself from shame, from being seen as someone who let things happen. When you grow up in a broken family like the Finch, what would be an obvious act of cruelty can seem normal. But when you understand it as normal, you don't usually hide it. She must have been conscious of the atrocity this represented and tried to separate herself from it, still letting her own kids live in that weird environment. And to be fair to her, sometimes it's hard to choose something else when it's all you've known. And now that Edith grew up, she understands that.
But if she never told me about an uncle under the house, I can only imagine what else she was hiding.
Some things were not hidden. The curse was clearly on display. The rooms were metaphorical tombstones, but there were literal ones just outside. As you follow the trails beyond the tunnels, Edith starts to wonder if this quest she's on, this quest to understand her origin, her family, isn't in fact playing into the problem.
Now I'm worried the stories themselves might be the problem.
Seeking to understand the stories might just be empowering them, if not for her, for the next generation. And it's the first time she acknowledges in a more direct manner the fact that she is pregnant. You could always see it looking down with the camera, and there were a couple mentions about the size of her belly. But this time we fully understand that this journal she's reading, the one we are playing through, is destined to our kid. Understanding the curse is her way to untangle its shackles, to make sure she won't pass it down. Understanding something is often the best way to destroy its mysticism, bring it back down to what it is, a series of choices and interpretations made by a narcissistic person, Edie. Walking around, you go to the cemetery, which was built way before the house was finished. Stones waiting for the family members to die. Another way to make it normal. So normal that
The pet cemetery made me more uncomfortable than the human one.
each deceased family member has its stone, except for Milton's, Edith's brother, since they never found his body after his disappearance. Edith's mom insisted on that. There's something so human about hoping for something that clearly can't be. We can't help it. It's the little mentions like that, these throwaways commentary from our narrator that really paints a more complete and accurate portrait of these unseen characters. They take life through Edith's words, and these small details really add up to make us feel the story in a more complete manner. We go back to the house where there's a climb. Even Edith acknowledges the absurdity of it. This is a great moment of characterization. Climbing the way she does is dangerous, even more so being pregnant. And yet she carries on. It would be hard to express in a better way how much her past weighs on her than to see her risk herself in this way. It's almost like she's telling us through her actions that it would be better for a child to die with her than to live a life without the answers she's seeking. She wants him to be free, unlike her mother ended up being. We technically have already been in Sam's room, just the one he shared with his twin brother as a kid. The one we enter now is about its later life. We can see he went on to join the army, had kids, and apparently enjoyed taking pictures. And this time they are our point of entry. It's not a journal or a text. It's a series of photographs taken by him and his daughter, Dawn, Edith's mother. When Dawn was 15, they went on a hunting trip, and it's what we are playing through. I love how simple the gameplay here is. You play the moment each picture was taken, the small conversations between Dawn and Sam. You just have to find the right framing, and once you click, it goes to the next scene. The music playing in the background is hopeful, a little bit melancholic, but not sad. It really conveys well the feeling of remembering a good memory you shared with someone you lost. The part of grief where you just get to be grateful you shared that life of yours with someone so extraordinary. The song is calming. I love all of it. At the end, Dawn kills her first deer and starts crying. Sam comforts her, telling her how proud he is and how important it is to be strong. As she poses with their prey, Sam runs back to the cliff with the camera's shutter lag running. Dawn mentions the animal is twitching. Sam says it's all fine, and then the animal wakes up and hits him off the ledge. And click, the photograph is taken. His last moment, our last photo, and we come back to the room. We then hear this.
Of all these stories, that's the one I wish most that my mom had told me.
This is a great follow-up to Edith's dilemma when she was asking herself if telling her family story to her kid was a good idea or not. I think parents fear to share these kinds of stories with their kids. It breaks the illusion of them being bigger than life. At the beginning, you can rationalize it as a way to protect your kids because they're too young to hear it. But the older they grow, the less and less relevant this argument becomes. It's a sort of emotional procrastination, holding on to an image you know to be fabricated by your silence. Sharing is a way to heal, but also a way to create a space where others can share. That first step of courage often invites others to do the same. Dawn never shared it with her daughter. And in that quest to end the cycle of generational trauma, it seems that this room makes her more certain that the answer is to tell the story as it is, and trust that her kid will learn the right lessons from it. This room really is the biggest and most necessary use of poetry to filter a story, because otherwise I just don't see how playing through Gregory's death would have been bearable. Because I don't think there's something more horrible than a baby dying. In a crib, you find Gregory's portrait, and just under it, a divorce contract. On the second page, you can read Sam's parting words to his wife, Memories of Gregory. The tone conveyed by the actor is kind. This is not an acrimonious divorce. There's no resentment. You now control Gregory playing around in his bath. Classical music plays as toys come alive. The narration talks about how happy Gregory seemed, how he saw a world we couldn't see as adults. It's so magical and wholesome, you forget this is a story about his death. He died because Kay, his mother, answered the phone, and while she was speaking, he opened the water again. And in a fucked up way, you run the water again. It's part of the necessary gameplay to go through this segment. And we all understand what happens from there, and instead of stopping it at that point, or worse, making us go through it, the game transforms this moment through a kind of playful filter. For Gregory, he's now a frog swimming around all his friends, enjoying a new experience. Babies aren't aware of tragedies, even their own. Sam expresses how convinced he is that this is not Kay's fault. Even through divorce, he only wishes the impossible, for her not to hate herself. I find it hard to think of a bigger burden to bear than to feel responsible for the death of your child, but it exemplifies how far away we are from Edie's reaction. How Kay deals with it is how it usually goes, even though in a perfect world you'd find a way to forgive yourself. Sam gives a great lesson about pain, that no matter how all-encompassing it can become, blame and hatred are traps that keep you in it. So in the weirdest way possible, Edith's grandfather can teach her an important lesson through a 30-year-old divorce filing. And not 5 feet away, another bed. Greg's older brother, Gus, dead at 13. This time, the point of entry to the story is a literal poem left behind by Dawn. Gus plays around with a kite as we hear a young Dawn reciting her work in the background.
Our father never hit us kids, at least not very hard, before the day my brother said with teenage disregard that he'd be dead before he'd see a wedding in our yard.
The kite flies through the air, bouncing around every obstacle with a surreal feeling, binding the subtitles to its tail until it even engulfs every object found on the beach. The music seems calm, but the sound of the wind grows and grows until the kite is hidden behind a growing mass of objects biting on in a powerful tornado. Gus stayed out in the storm, opposing the new marriage of his dad. It's easy to see a direct link between Gus and Greg's deaths. One died and ended the marriage, while the other died as the new marriage began. Like many of the other siblings, they have a cause and effect, a game of tragic dominoes falling on each other, waiting for someone to finally end the fall. A trail that brings us closer and closer to Edith's immediate family, her mother and brothers. The game increases in intimacy and the deaths feel more and more personal. It's less about the Finch as a whole and more about her. About who she lost. Milton's room is perhaps the simplest. He is defined by the paintings he left behind and he has no story per se. His shrine is the only one without a death date because they never found the body. He just disappeared. Having a lonely 1992 under a portrait is almost calming after the couple tragedies we just witnessed. His testament is a simple animation where he drew himself vanishing into a painting. I never found an in-game explanation of his disappearance, and I don't think there is a definitive one, and I'm okay with that. I love the detail that when Edith scribbles in her book about Milton, she adds the date of his disappearance. There's a dichotomy between her vision of it and her mom's. Weirdly, since she never really knew him, being 3 when he disappeared, she didn't try to protect herself from thinking he might still be alive out there. It's a small writing attention, but I think it's the type of moments that really add to the characterization. And I love Giant Sparrow for that. Before the next room, I have to stop for a moment because this is one of those genius artistic productions. It could be the Starry Night of gaming. It's a monument of the medium it's in. So if you'd like to play it for yourself, I would encourage that, because the poetic depth brought by experiencing its interactivity is really a moment of rare quality. That being said, I'll try to do it justice, but still. Lewis is Edith's oldest brother, and therefore he was alive when Milton disappeared. And as expected, this was hard. Not only was it a loss difficult to accept because Milton was never found, but also because it gave him a space to blame himself. When you have no explanation, it's hard not to contemplate the ones where you could have changed something. His room is an old boat fixed atop the house. The decoration is filled with imagery of marijuana, which was apparently his self-medication of choice. He isolated himself in that room, smoking weed and playing video games all day. His mom found him a job at the cannery nearby. She clearly was alarmed by his situation and made him meet with a psychiatrist who helped him to sober up. And the document that will be the narration of his story is in fact a letter the doctor wrote to Dawn after Lois' passing. She empathizes over the need for explanation, a theme recurrent of Milton's story, and she took the time to write her a personal letter, something warmer, truer than the sometimes cold, factual literacy of medicine. We played through that sequence as Lewis goes through his day at the cannery, mechanically cutting the head of the fish passed down to him before sending them back to the conveyor belt. Well, you do. And right there you think, hey, this thing cuts people who get cut can die, I'm playing his death, I know where this is going. And you try to be very, very careful. But the psychiatrist starts to explain how he would withdraw himself from the moment, imagining anything else but the boring reality of an unfulfilling job. And a game appears, the story he is making up in his head, and you now control both his imagination and the reality. The balance is hard to find. Every moment you spend not watching where you are putting the fish, you feel like you are leading him to his death. I've rarely been so engaged in a game. I felt responsible, I wanted to protect him, and yet I'm exactly like him. I'm drawn to his imagination. My brain tries to relay the repetitive task to a mechanical process not worth my attention. I'm in synchronicity with Lewis. The subtitles integration exchange between the two worlds. His solution is functioning. The imagination takes a bigger and bigger part of the screen. You almost forget to fear. The psychiatrist notes that this is working for him. He is a good worker, the boss is happy. What could go wrong? You slice the fish, you are a champion. It's harder and harder to see the conveyor. He is the master of his world. He is the slave of the other. The music is happy, fantastical, gamey. You conquer the sea. Lois forgets to go home. His mom is worried. She comes. He is there, but he isn't. You make choices in the new epic tale he is coming up with. Your eyes go back to the cannery in the hope that you won't kill him. There's nothing left but his imagination. The fish pile up. Triumphant music plays. The border between you, Lewis, the world, his imagination, they blur. You enter a golden door. You're back in the cannery. Lewis is detached from himself. You are him, and yet you walk by him. He's just a machine. That, Lewis, is not worth it. You climb back to the imaginary world. You are a hero, a king. It's the coronation. The crown falls down at the same time as the guillotine. Lewis killed himself in 2010. He chose to die. Anybody who lost someone by suicide will tell you how impossible it is not to go through every conversation you've had with that person, either to find the clues you missed, or to hate yourself for the words you didn't find, the ones that could have made him stay. I think you can see why this part is considered a masterful moment of gaming. How playing through it gave you the comprehension the other characters longed for. And in terms of story, it is a great tipping point. Because suicide is just different. The fact that it's a choice puts it apart from the others, and this leads us well into the ending of the bigger story. At this point, Dawn has lost 2 kids, one without an apparent reason, and the other for the most unbearable one. And this was the point where she decided to end it, end that relationship with the house and the curse, and more importantly, with her mother, Edie. Dawn and Edith share the same room. They never packed before they left, blurring the line between leaving and fleeing. You go through the room, then the stairs, and finally a ladder, reaching what seems like a physics-defying top of the house. A bed with Edith's name on it. No date, just a feather. The one she used to write this journal entry about their last night at the house. A fixed shot from above the kitchen table. Only Edith is framed, her arched head bearing the weight of her elder dispute. Edith is excused. There's a time lapse. We weasel our way in Edie's room, eavesdropping on the continuation of their fight. This is the real foundation of that dispute. Dawn is trying to end the cycle of generational trauma by cutting the ties to the family tree, while Edie clings to it because it defines her. And ironically, at that very moment, Edith finds Edie's parting words, a story written down with the usual decorum of the Finch family.
Dear Edith, there's so many stories I wish I could tell you, but there's only time for one. This is about what happened on the night you were born.
This is a story about a rising tide so intense that the whole seafloor was now dried up, revealing the old house brought from Norway that had sunk. This is mythological, the last attempt from Edie to reinforce the legend. And just as we were about to enter the old house, we snap out of it. Dawn is there. She grabs the manuscript. We pull on it until the book rips in two. Edie's death left a void. No matter how disruptive her presence and stories were, they were still a massive part of their lives. When you've grown accustomed to tragedies, their absence is sometimes just as weird as their presence. The end of the game is about the life of Dawn and Edith after they left. If you've grown to know this game, it's also about their death. The scenes are beautiful, anchored shots with wonderful subtitle uses. Edith narrates how Dawn got sick, how she died.
And then I was alone.
And then the last moment we share with Edith is the birth of her child, and the words she imparts with him. How she wished he didn't have to read about all of this, how she wanted to tell him. How the goal of this weird and chaotic thing we call life is to find ways to appreciate it. She never could. We can presume Edith Finch died giving birth to her child. The last shot is him holding the journal we've been reading all along in front of Edith's grave back at the house. And as we zoom out, it's easy to wonder, what will remain of Edith Finch? And there it is, the magnificence of this game. A masterpiece that really dug deep into the video game language to find its unique form of poetry. A game that understood how interactivity can be a doorway to an emotional experience. A text that found a way to transform unbearable stories into moments of beauty that can make us reflect on these hardships without having to go through them. It's a tale that untangles a very hard subject to really grasp. Generational trauma. How pain flows down the genealogical tree like a tainted sap, each new member of the family bearing a darkness that is not their own. It's usually hard to explain, and yet here you feel the cascade because you played through it. You've been these characters, you've entered their stories and felt their struggle. I love that game, and if I had only one shot to convince anyone that games are exactly as valid an artistic expression as literature, cinema, sculpture, or theater, I would present What Remains of Edith Finch.